She thought it was just an addiction, but that night, something appeared, and what she saw, it will make you rethink everything you believe about the spiritual world. This story is not just a report, it is a warning. What will you hear now? It can change the way you see the spiritual world, and even what you do in your everyday life. But I need you to stay until the end, because only in the end will you understand why do certain things seem so hard to let go of, and what could really be behind this. Take a deep breath, and get ready for a real testimony that will stir your soul. My name is Emily Thompson. I'm 34 years old. I've always been a strong woman on the outside, but broken on the inside. That was the phrase Emily used to introduce herself in a support room when she finally had the courage to admit that something was wrong. But the truth is that this apparent strength she carried was a mask well built over the years, an armor that hid deep scars. From a very early age, Emily learned to survive emotionally. She grew up in a home marked by the absence of her father, who abandoned the family when she was just 6 years old. His mother, overwhelmed and quietly depressed, did what she could, but was always distant, physically and emotionally. Emily had no one to talk to, no one to vent to, so she grew up listening to inner voices that said, "You have to manage it alone. No one is going to come and save you." At school, she became that girl that everyone admired, intelligent, diligent, smiling. But inside there was a deafening silence. He never cried in public. He never showed weakness. While other teenagers had their crises, Emily was the mature one, the one who always had advice. But no one knew that she came home and locked herself in her room wanting to disappear. This contrast between the image he showed to the world and the pain he carried inside became part of his identity. It was like living in two worlds, and she adapted to the pain so well that she started to think it was normal. Adolescence was marked by small escapes, fantasy books, sad songs, diaries where I spilled everything I couldn't say out loud. But none of these escapes filled what she called the hole in her chest. Emily didn't know how to put it into words, but it was as if a piece was missing inside her, a kind of emptiness that hurt invisibly and constantly. Over time, she began to seek other distractions, nothing too radical, but enough to divert his attention from what he felt. It was at this stage that she began to excel in her studies. His career became his obsession. She wanted to prove to her mother, to others, and especially to herself, that she was enough, that she was capable, that the past would not define her. Emily entered college early, graduated in business administration, and by the age of 25, she was already a manager at a multinational. Success? In the eyes of the world, yes. But inside, the emptiness only grew. The more I achieved, the more I felt that nothing was enough. With life on track, comparisons with other women came. The demand to get married, have children, be in a perfect relationship. But Emily couldn't trust anyone enough to turn herself in. She was afraid of being abandoned again. Love for her was a beautiful idea, and dangerous. Better to keep your distance, better to keep control. After all, control was the only way he knew to survive. But no one can control everything forever. And it was at this moment of emotional accumulation, exhaustion and sleepless nights, that addiction entered the scene, in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. At first, it was just an occasional cigarette, at parties or work meetings. Afterwards, it became a constant companion for office breaks. And finally, it became a solitary ritual at home, in the dark, sitting on the porch, as if that cigarette was the only one that really understood her. And as strange as it may seem, she felt safe with that. It was one of the few moments when I could take a deep breath and feel something happening, a break from the pain, a distraction of the mind. But what seemed to control her soon began to control her, and Emily still had no idea what that something really was. How many Emilys are there out there, smiling on the outside and screaming on the inside? Strong, admired people, but who live daily with the weight of abandonment and emptiness, seeking refuge in addictions disguised as relief, of course. Here's a more powerful, emotional, and magnetic version of your call to sign up, with mental triggers of belonging, impact, and spiritual transformation, maintaining the atmosphere of the narrative and increasing the strength of the message. If something inside you has already shaken just by hearing this story, then you are in the right place. Click subscribe now and activate the bell, because here you will find out real testimonies that not only give you chills, but confront, heal, and rekindle your faith. This channel is not just about stories, It's about encounters with the supernatural that will change destinies, including yours. Emily never wanted to be a rebel. She wasn't the kind of girl who defied teachers or made a fuss for attention. What she wanted, and perhaps she never admitted it even to herself, was just to belong. In that big school, with hallways full of sharp eyes and groups closed like fortresses, the desire to fit in was more urgent than any homework. And it was precisely there that cigarettes appeared for the first time, almost like a ticket. It all started during a random break in a little watched corner of the school, where some cooler classmates got together to laugh loudly, tell dirty secrets and share cigarettes like someone sharing war secrets. Emily walked past them with curiosity disguised as indifference, until one day, one of the girls held out her hand with a cigarette and asked, "Are you going to want it? Or are you just going to look?" It was just a drink, just a curiosity, just a test. But there, in that seemingly harmless gesture, something lit up inside her. And it wasn't just the cigarette butt. The first drag was bitter, irritating, and made me cough. But at the same time, it was accompanied by a look of approval from the group. Laughter, a pat on the back. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, that he had overcome an invisible barrier. Cigarettes weren't tasty, but belonging was. And that for someone who always felt on the margins, had an addictive flavor. It was like a seal of social acceptance. And Emily, for the first time, felt in. But what started as a social and sporadic gesture slowly gained space in his daily life. She started smoking during school breaks, then on dates with friends, and was soon buying her own packs in secret. Soon, that habit became routine, and the routine became a necessity. The cigarette had stopped being a symbol of acceptance and had become a silent refuge. A friend who didn't judge, didn't demand explanations. He was there whenever the pain came back, and it came back often. Deep down, Emily knew it wasn't just about the cigarettes. It was about everything he masked. Every time she felt a knot in her stomach, every time the tears wanted to fall, but she swallowed them down hard, she lit a cigarette, as if that gesture was enough to silence the world inside her. The smoke seemed to occupy the space of the scream that was never given. He took a deep breath, like someone trying to breathe for the first time after sinking. It was, in some way, an escape valve, and there was something almost poetic about the cigarette ritual. Emily saw it as a moment of her own, away from the noise, away from the demands, away from expectations. It was on the balcony at night, with the city asleep, that she smoked most. There, the world seemed to stop. Cigarettes became company on long, cold nights. And, as sad as it may seem, she felt less alone with a lit cigarette in her hand than surrounded by people. But that's the danger of emotional retreats. They seem harmless at first. They offer momentary relief, but demand a high price later. Emily didn't realize when she no longer had control. Cigarettes became the first thought when waking up, and the last one before going to sleep. He started hiding it from his mother, his friends, his co-workers. But even hidden, the habit grew, and she said to herself, "I'll let go whenever I want." But deep down, I already knew that I didn't want to let go, and maybe I couldn't even do it anymore. It's curious how addiction sneaks in. He never knocks on the door saying, "I'm going to destroy you." It comes as comfort, like a fake hug on difficult days, like chemical relief for pains that are actually emotional and spiritual. And that's why he's so seductive and so dangerous. Emily didn't know it yet, but that dependence was rooting something much bigger than she could imagine. Addiction rarely begins with a yes to evil. It almost always comes in as a why not, innocent, until he ends up in prison. And what begins in the body is often a reflection of a soul that cries out for help. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone lose themselves trying to feel accepted? Comment yes or no below. Share your experience here with us. Let's root for Emily together, because what happens next is even deeper. Emily didn't realize when she lost control. One day, she only realized that she needed to buy another pack before returning home, after having already smoked the last one in less than 24 hours. And then came the scare. She was consuming almost 2 packs a day. It was no longer for pleasure. It was no longer about socialization. It was out of compulsion. She no longer chose to smoke. She needed it. She began to notice warning signs. Dry coughs upon waking up, shortness of breath on simple stares, skin losing its shine, breath always heavy, and a strange feeling that I was being watched. But even so, he lit another cigarette, and another one, and another one. It was as if his body had taken over, and his mind was just watching from afar. She no longer had control over her own gestures. What hurt most was the feeling of constant failure. Emily was a disciplined woman in all other areas of her life, at work, in her studies, in her finances. But with that addiction, she looked like a helpless child. Tried nicotine patches, tried teas, tried control apps, hypnosis, guided meditation. He made promises on birthdays, New Year's, Lent. I would stop for 2 days and relapse on the third with even more guilt. And guilt, in turn, required more smoke to anesthetize. It was a cycle that sucked everything, and she felt like she was sinking without being able to call for help. People around him began to notice. A friend commented on the constant smell. A colleague at work suggested maybe trying to get medical help. Even his mother, even in silence, let out worried looks. But Emily would smile, say, everything is under control, and change the subject. After all, who would believe that a woman like her, who organized teams, led meetings, gave lectures, couldn't beat a piece of paper wrapped in smoke? But the truth was even harsher. Smoking was no longer a physical habit. It was an emotional and spiritual prison. And she, without understanding how, was chained by something she couldn't see. It was as if there was an invisible weight on her shoulders, a subtle force that pushed her back every time she tried to get up. The simple act of lighting up was accompanied by a feeling of immediate relief, followed by overwhelming guilt minutes later. But even so, she repeated it every day. Interestingly, Emily started having strange dreams. He was always running from something, trying to escape, but his legs were stuck. In one of them, he saw himself lighting a cigarette, while the house caught fire around him. In another, she felt suffocated by smoke that no one else could see. She would wake up scared with her heart racing, but as soon as the sun rose, another one would light up. It was as if something inside her wanted to scream, but was immediately silenced. And this is something that many ignore. Addiction is not just chemical. It is also emotional, mental, and spiritual. It becomes part of the person's identity. It takes away your autonomy, drains your energy, and it silently shapes the way a person thinks about themselves. Emily no longer saw herself as free. She saw herself as someone who was really addicted to what to do. This mentality is one of the biggest poisons of addiction, convincing you that you are what it says you are. She even tried to convince herself that it wasn't that serious. There are people with worse problems, he said. At least I don't do drugs. But deep down, he knew he was slowly destroying himself. His mood fluctuated. His productivity fell. His prayers were rare. And when they did happen, they were full of guilt. It was as if the cigarette was between her and God, a wall made of smoke, shame, and silence. A silence that screamed. Sometimes the biggest prison is not the chain. It's the feeling that no one understands you. And addiction loves this place of isolation, because there, it grows, dominates, and deceives. When did she lose control? There was no screaming, no clear signs, just a habit. That became a refuge. A refuge. That became a cell. And when he realized, he no longer had the keys. Comment: there's still time if you believe that no one is trapped forever. But prepare yourself, because what's about to be revealed, it will change everything you think about what really holds us back. Emily was never the fervently religious type, but when she was a child, she fondly remembered praying with her grandmother before bed. It was simple, but comforting. Back then, God was a natural presence, almost, like a warm blanket on cold nights. But with time and with pain, those memories turned to dust in the back of the mind. The adult world, fast-paced and cruel, pushed faith out of the picture, and she, without realizing it, stopped praying. He stopped talking to God, and the silence became too deep to ignore. It wasn't something immediate. It was subtle, like a light that dims without fanfare. First, she stopped saying thank you. Then he stopped asking. And then, one day, he simply couldn't remember the last time he had really spoken to God. The Bible was forgotten at the bottom of a drawer. The songs that once made her cry now irritated her. The cults, which once brought peace, now seemed disconnected from their reality. Emily walked away and didn't even realize she was walking into an invisible abyss. But what she didn't expect was what came next. With spiritual distance, something darker began to approach. It was not visible. It had no name, but it was there. The nights became long, restless. She woke up with her heart racing, as if she had run away from something in her dreams. On some early mornings, she felt like there was something in the room with her, even if her eyes couldn't see. It was like a cold, observant presence, standing in the corners. And no matter how much she told herself it was a tired mind thing, a part of her knew it wasn't just that. Emily started hearing whispers at night. Not clear words, but strange noises, as if someone was murmuring. Within the walls. Sometimes it was as if voices were fighting in the background, too far away to understand but close enough to disturb. Once, he even got out of bed to check if the TV was on, but everything was off. Nobody listened anymore. Nobody saw it anymore. And that's when she realized that was just her. Spiritual oppression manifested itself even during the day. Sometimes I would get sudden headaches when entering certain places. In others, an unexplained anguish took her out of nowhere. It felt like something was feeding on your energy, your spirit, your soul. It was like carrying an invisible weight on your shoulders, which wouldn't go away even with rest. Emily didn't know how to name it, but she knew that it wasn't normal. Something inside her screamed, "You are losing yourself," and the most painful. Emily wanted to go back. I wanted to pray. I wanted to feel God again. But every time I tried, it seemed blocked. The words didn't come out. The thought diverted. A distraction appeared, and then came the guilt, and with it the cigarette. The truth is that spiritual distancing didn't make her freer. It made her more vulnerable, and vulnerability was the perfect ground for everything that would come later. It is impressive how the human spirit feels the absence of the sacred. Even those who try to deny, rationalize, or ignore it know that something breaks when we cut the connection with the Creator. Emily was no exception. She didn't want to turn her back on God. She just became distracted, hardened, distanced, and when he tried to come back, it seemed too late. But what she didn't yet know was that with God, it's never too late. Spiritual life does not suddenly collapse. It dissolves into silences, distractions, small separations, until one day the emptiness becomes too dark to ignore. Have you ever had the feeling of moving away from something that once brought you peace, but now you don't know how to get back? Comment yes or no, and share your experience. Your story can be the instrument that God will use to lift someone whose pieces are still on the ground. And be careful, don't leave now. What's next? It will surprise you, and maybe open your eyes like never before. That night started like any other. Emily had smoked the last of the cigarettes in her pack and was more restless than usual. He went to bed later than usual, his body tired, but his mind in turmoil. The silence in the apartment was interrupted only by the sound of the kitchen clock, tick-tock, tick-tock, which that night seemed to pulse inside his head like an alert. But even so, sleep came. But what awaited her in the next few hours, it wasn't rest. It was confrontation. Emily woke up suddenly, panting. I felt as if I had been ripped out of a deep nightmare, but without being able to remember the plot. She tried to sit up, but a weight on her chest stopped her. The room was dark, darker than usual, as if the darkness itself had life. The air was thick, suffocating. She tried to turn on the lamp. Nothing. The electricity seemed to have been sucked out of the room. That's when he felt she was not alone. In the corner of the room, shadows began to move. At first, she thought her vision was distorted, but then they began to take shape. There were seven dark, grotesque, deformed figures. Some were huge, bent as if carrying centuries of pain in their backs. Others were small, but with eyes so bright that they seemed to pierce your soul. From inside them, dense smoke was coming out, slowly spiraling through the air, and bringing a smell of sulfur, burning, and fear. They surrounded her. Emily wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out. It was as if she had been shut down from the inside. The creatures didn't speak, but they laughed. A muffled, macabre laugh, as if mocking his fragility. His eyes were streaming with tears, but his body was paralyzed. And it was then that something began to reveal itself within. His spirit. Each of those entities represented an area where it was being destroyed. The first had ember eyes and a chain around her neck. It was the addiction, and his hands looked like claws that held burning cigarettes. The second was thin, skeletal, with long fingers that scratched the walls, the self-destruction. The third, covered by dark veils, murmured incomprehensible things, the fear. The fourth, with its forked tongue, uttered false, distorted sentences, the lie. The farm seemed to cry blood, the despair. The sixth, wrapped in chains, dragged her feet, the prison. And the last one, the silent one, had no face. just a hole where the face should be. That was the death. Emily understood at that moment. This was not a dream, nor an outbreak. It was a spiritual revelation, something that was present the whole time, acting in silence, feeding on your pain, your addiction, your distance from God. This was closer than she ever imagined. It was not symbolic, it was real. The scariest thing was the familiarity. She recognized in an inexplicable way each of those entities. It was as if I had lived with them for years, as if I had felt them in every puff, in every anxiety attack, in every lonely dawn. The spiritual world, previously theoretical or religious, now pulsed before her, with form, smell, and presence, and it was impossible to ignore. Emily had no words, but within her a timid prayer began to form, a whispered thought coming from the depths of the soul. God, help me. And even without knowing it, even without being able to finish the sentence, something there began to change. But it was not yet time for liberation. It was time for the truth to come out, raw, cold, and undeniable. Often, what we call emotional weight can be just the visible tip of an invisible war. And the spiritual world, when it reveals itself, does not ask for permission. It reveals what has always been hidden. Now, a question for you to reflect on courageously. Have you ever felt like you were being suffocated by something no one else saw? Comment with a heart if yes. Your comment can be a sign of strength for those who are also facing this battle and haven't yet had the courage to tell them. And don't leave for anything, because in the next chapter, Emily will make a cry that changes everything, and heaven will respond. Emily didn't know how long it had been since those presences took over the room. Reality seemed suspended, as if time was frozen within a parallel dimension. Still lying there, paralyzed and enveloped in that dark atmosphere, she felt the weight of death hovering like a thick cloud. The 7 entities stared at her with hungry eyes, as if they were waiting for one last breath of giving up. And at that point, she almost gave in. Almost. But it was at that moment, that threshold between collapse and miracle, that something inside Emily broke. It was not a rational decision. It was a cry from the soul, a moan that overtook his throat, his mind, his logic. Between tears that flowed hot and involuntary, she screamed with everything she had, "Jesus, free me, I can't take it anymore." And that scream wasn't just heard, it was felt, in heaven, in hell, and inside her. The environment reacted immediately. The air, which was as thick as lead, began to change. The supernatural cold was being replaced by an inexplicable sensation of heat, not physical, but spiritual. It was as if a divine breath had invaded the space, pushing away everything that previously dominated there. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt something different inside her chest, something alive, something pure, something she had forgotten existed. Shadows began to stir. The entities, who had previously looked at her with derision, now squirmed. Some retreated. Others seemed to cower before an invisible but overwhelmingly superior presence. The room was no longer empty. Emily saw no faces, heard no audible voices, but she knew God had entered, and where the light enters, the darkness cannot stay. His voice, still trembling, began to repeat simple phrases. "Jesus, help me. I don't want to live like this anymore. Get me out of here." And as he spoke, more tears fell, not of fear, but of surrender, of brokenness. It was as if each word washed away a layer of old pain, dissolved years of pride, of silence, of resistance. For the first time, she wasn't trying to be strong. She was being truthful, and that has power. Emily knelt down, still trembling, still not understanding what exactly was happening, but with my heart surrendered. His knees touched the floor as if recognizing an altar that had been neglected for years. And even without memorized prayers, without religious formulas, she touched the sky sincerely. It was as if every tear was being translated before the throne of God. Because when the pain is authentic, the divine response is inevitable. The atmosphere in the room was now different. The weight had gone off, fear silenced. And although the shadows still lingered, they no longer had authority. Something had been broken that night, still invisible, still in process, but real. Emily, without understanding everything that was happening, he felt inside himself that this was the beginning of something bigger, something that would come with force, something that would come with light. There are no weak prayers when they come from broken hearts. And sometimes all God needs to act is an honest, "Help me from the depths of the abyss." Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that a simple scream can break invisible chains? Try. Write "Strength Emily" in the comments to show that she is not alone in this war. And now, you will see what happens when the cry of the soul meets the power of divine response. In full fidelity to your request and maintaining the deep, emotional and progressive narrative structure, here is the development of Topic 9, Message for Those Who Watch. With approximately 5,000 characters, the message is direct, spiritual and reflective, but constructed with narrative power, practical symbolism, and emotional connection, leading the public to question your own invisible prisons without sounding accusative and with a provocative and sensitive closure as requested. 9. Message for Those Who Watch. Full storytelling. Emily didn't know exactly how to explain what she had experienced. He couldn't put into words precisely what he saw, felt, and faced that night. But she knew, with a clarity that hurt her chest, that this wasn't just about her. That was a calling, a warning, a message that needed to be said. And if you're listening to his story right now, then maybe this message is for you too. She didn't get up from the ground completely healed, nor with a perfect life all of a sudden, but something changed, something broke. The cycle of silence has been interrupted, and in the place of darkness, understanding began to emerge. That cigarette that once seemed like a refuge was now a reminder of captivity. That smoke she used to fill the void, now she saw it as a curtain between her and the truth. Emily understood that addiction wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, it was strategic, was a trap disguised as relief. Many people still believe that certain habits are just a matter of habit. It all comes down to willpower. But what Emily experienced is a reminder that the visible world is only a part of reality. There is an invisible field and spiritual, where decisions, addictions, traumas, and choices are nourished by forces that we are not always aware of. And often, what you call addiction is actually a spiritual cell that was built in silence. Maybe you've felt this too, a weight that no one sees, an impulse that controls you even when you say enough, a cycle that you repeat even though you cry inside. This is not just psychological, it's not just behavior. Sometimes it is spiritual warfare. And the worst part, it happens inside you, and no one else notices. It's you fighting against something that hides behind justifications like it's just a habit or an escape. Emily today speaks with authority, not because she won alone, but because he had the courage to cry out, to expose his fragility before God and ask for help. She is proof that shouting "set me free" is not weakness. It is the beginning of strength. It's the first step to breaking the chain that many people think doesn't exist, but that is there, tying emotions, thoughts, and even destiny. And if you identified yourself in any part of this journey, maybe it's because this story is giving you a mirror, a reflection of what you pretend is under control, but no longer is. A divine pause in your day to remind you that the spiritual is real, that God still frees, and that what dominates you in secret can be faced in the light. You may even think that your cigarette is not a problem, that your habit is harmless. But the real question is, why do you still need this to feel whole? What is this custom trying to silence inside you? And if what you call normal, is it just the way captivity has become comfortable? Not every prison has bars. Some come disguised as routine, habit, or pleasure, but they steal from you inside, slowly in silence. Only the truth sets you free, and only those who truly surrender find the way out. Addiction blinds us, and the worst kind of prison is the one where we believe we can get out whenever we want. We think we have control, but we remain chained, convinced by a lie that has learned to speak with our own voice. And now I ask you, have you ever experienced a situation where you realized that you were no longer in control of your life? Comment yes or no, and if you can, share your experience. Your truth could be the key that frees someone who has not yet seen their own prison. Addiction begins as a relief, but ends as a bondage. Emily believed she had control until she realized she was being controlled, but it was at the moment she surrendered, broken, that her true strength appeared. Liberation is not about winning alone. It is about recognizing that only Jesus can break invisible chains. If you struggle with an addiction, write in the comments, "Jesus set me free." Now close your eyes, I want to pray for you. Lord Jesus, I pray for this life you are watching now. You know the struggles, the invisible chains, the weights she carries in silence. May At this very moment, your Holy Spirit visit this heart, breaking every addiction, every emotional and spiritual prison. May there be light where there was darkness, strength where there was weakness, and liberation where there was only despair. In the name of Jesus, that from today onwards, everything begins to be different. Amen. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this truth, and subscribe to the channel to follow real testimonies that are impacting lives. Do you want to continue seeing testimonies that will touch your soul and transform your view of faith? Click on the next video and get ready to be even more moved.